Hello everyone. Tonight, we begin with the kind of spiritual calling that comes not with light, but with nausea, tremors, and a voice in your chest that definitely isn't yours. From vomiting into leaves while the forest watches, to being seduced by spirits who flirt inside your dreams, to singing in a language you've never learned while someone else moves your tongue. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if the idea of being gently haunted by ancient plants feels oddly relaxing to you. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I'm in São Paulo. Midnight in Manila. Just finished work and whisper watching under the covers. Now, lower the lights, maybe light a candle. Let the night settle on your shoulders, and let's step together into the jungle, where silence isn't empty, it's crowded. Let me tell you about the person you could have been. Not someone who grew up Googling spiritual awakening symptoms or buying sage from a yoga influencer named Chad. Someone whose initiation wasn't optional, whose first job title was vessel. Someone who didn't apply for the role, didn't train for it, and didn't know what was happening when their dreams started speaking in bird language and the forest began whispering back. If you'd been born to a riverbank in the western Amazon instead of a neighborhood with Wi-Fi and HOA fees, your fate might have been sealed the day you caught a fever that wouldn't go away. Not just any fever, the kind that makes your eyes glaze and your mouth chant things no one taught you. Your grandmother would have recognized the signs. She'd seen it before. The shaking, the visions, the strange way you stared at fire like it had something to say. And just like that, you'd be marked. Not in a cute chosen one way. Not with applause or cake. No, in the eyes of your community, you'd become different, touched. Not quite here, but not quite gone either. You'd be the one they watched from the corner of the firelight. The one they didn't scold for talking to shadows. The one the elders whispered about after ceremony. Because in many Amazonian cultures, among the Shipibo-Canibo, the Ashaninka, the Tucano, sickness, trance, and unexplainable dreams aren't problems to be solved. They're messages, and when those messages come for a child, everyone gets nervous. Not sad, not worried. Nervous because they know what comes next. It means the spirits want in. See, the spirits don't do interviews. They don't leave a voicemail. They pick a body and start unpacking. Sometimes they whisper. Sometimes they barge in like they own the place. But once they've chosen you, that's it. You don't get to say, sorry, I'm focusing on myself right now. You belong to both worlds now. The one with mosquitoes and mud, and the one that shows up when your eyes roll back and your spine goes stiff like a branch full of thunder. That's how it starts. You're not a healer yet. You're not a shaman. You're a hallway with legs. A doorway that's still learning how to stay open without shattering. And everyone knows you won't be fun to be around for a while. You might shake. You might laugh at things that aren't funny. You might suddenly speak a language no one in your family understands. One you'll forget by morning. Your parents, they stop treating you like a child. The affection turns to caution, not because they don't love you, but because they're afraid they might say the wrong thing and offend whoever's already renting space behind your eyes. You're not possessed yet, not officially, but you've been preselected, like fruit the spirits plan to ripen later. And this, oddly enough, is considered an honor, which means, instead of resting, you're being prepared. Carefully, diets change, rules appear. Certain people stop making eye contact. You're not allowed to eat salt anymore, and no one tells you why. You're not allowed to touch certain plants, or bathe during certain moons. You're not allowed to scream when things crawl through your dreams at night, but you do anyway, because the spirits are knocking. And sometimes, they don't knock. They claw, so now you're marked, a walking half-address, and no one tells you outright. But the rules have changed. You're not just a child anymore. You're a potential portal. And the world starts reacting to you like you're radioactive, or worse, holy. The symptoms aren't subtle. You wake up drenched in sweat after dreaming that a snake crawled into your chest and whispered your true name. Not the one your mother gave you, the other one, the one the forest seems to know. You talk to birds and they talk back, though you're never quite sure if it's out loud or just somewhere deeper than hearing. You say things that feel borrowed. You laugh at odd moments. You go very still when someone lies. People begin to notice the elders nod quietly. The other children avoid sitting next to you. And your mother, she watches you with that thin-lipped look that says, this isn't how I hoped it would go, but here we are. Among groups like the Shipibo and Yawanawa, the signs are well known. though no two initiates show them quite the same way. Some start seeing jaguars in the fire. Some cry uncontrollably when others are sick. Some wander off into the trees for hours and return saying things like, "The grandmother told me where the illness is hiding," which is not something you can explain over breakfast. And let's talk about breakfast, because you don't get much of one. Once the signs begin, food becomes a spiritual liability. You're weaned off salt, sugar, meat, and anything remotely tasty. You're put on the diet, not a trendy detox, a long, grueling, sacred restriction. The idea is simple. The cleaner your body, the clearer your channel. You don't feed yourself anymore, you feed your permeability. They start with boiled fish, then no fish, then maybe just boiled plantains, with no oil, no salt, and no flavor, which feels like chewing a damp sigh. Water has to be river water. Baths are monitored. Your skin is no longer yours, it's an antenna. And here's the kicker. The more your body breaks down, the more open you become. Which is a nice way of saying the spirits like it when you're weak. Sea spirits, or Igbo, Yoshi, Yuxin, depending on the group, don't show up at your convenience. They enter through cracks. So the more cracked you become, physically, emotionally, spiritually, the better. A high fever, excellent. Hallucinations from isolation, even better. A dream where a dismembered man hands you a flute made of bones and tells you to sing. Perfect. You're right on schedule. And while all this is happening, the weakness, the dreams, the seeing things that aren't things, your body starts to change in ways you can't control. You might shiver when it's warm, or burn up when it's cold. You might start sleeping in strange positions, or stop sleeping at all. Your stomach rejects food. Your mouth tastes like metal. Your breath starts to smell like the plants they've been feeding you, and your voice picks up a rhythm you don't recognize. You sound different, and everyone knows it. They stop calling you by your nickname. They start whispering around you, lighting extra mapacho when you walk by, or placing protective charms outside the communal hut. Not because they're trying to scare you, they're trying not to be taken with you. Because when you walk the line between the worlds, sometimes things follow. No one says it, but you've become a risk. And risks must be managed, which means you'll need to be removed for your safety and theirs. They'll lead you out of the village, maybe to a little hut in the trees, maybe to the edge of the river, maybe to a sacred spot only your shaman knows. You'll be alone, and that's when it really starts. You'll lead into the forest, not with fanfare or farewell hugs, but with the quiet seriousness usually reserved for funerals or exorcisms. No one says how long you'll be gone. No one explains exactly what will happen. They just pack your bundle, maybe a hammock, a pot, a bundle of dry herbs, and nod, and you go. Because when the spirits choose you, you don't get to sleep in your own bed anymore. In the Amazonian tradition, especially among the Shepibo-Kanibo, Tucano, or Motsigenka, isolation isn't just symbolic. It's literal, it's medicine, it's architecture for the soul. You're taken away from the daily rhythms of the village, the gossip, the food, the rhythms of other people's bodies, because those rhythms are loud, distracting, human, and to host a spirit, you can't be just human anymore. So they put you in a small hut, sometimes just a roof made from palm leaves, open to the elements. Sometimes it's miles away from home, sometimes just at the edge of the village, but it always feels far. The rules are clear. No sex, no salt, no sugar, no bathing during menstruation, no speaking unless absolutely necessary, and absolutely no touching anyone, or being touched. Touch transmits energy, and your energy is now a volatile soup of human and not human. The wrong touch could contaminate someone. The right touch could trigger a possession. You don't sleep much. The plants you've been given keep you on the edge, never quite tired, never quite awake. You might be drinking a bitter tea made from Kyric Sanango, Bobansana, or Ayasacha plants that taste like a curse and feel like one too. They open your dreams. They open your skin. They open you. Period. The days stretch. No one visits unless absolutely necessary. Your only companions are wind, insects, and the increasingly vivid sense that something is watching you from the canopy. Not a jaguar, not a person. Something slower, quieter, hungrier. Sometimes you forget you're not alone. Because in this space, where you haven't touched another soul in days, where your tongue feels like it's forgotten how to form your own name, something else begins to move in. A sensation behind your eyes, a voice you didn't invent, a heaviness in your chest that isn't fear and isn't sadness, but feels a bit like both wearing ceremonial robes. And just when you think you're going to break, just when you're about to march back to the village and declare this whole thing a spiritual mistake, your maestro appears. He doesn't knock. He doesn't ask how you're feeling. He stands at the edge of the clearing, watching you like a man watching a fire he's already seen burn down a dozen houses. He tells you nothing, but hands you a small gourd. You know what's in it. Ayahuasca, the vine of the dead, the rope between worlds. And this time, it's not for healing, it's not for insight. It's for transformation, for tearing the skin off your soul so the spirit can step inside. He sits across from you, begins to sing. The echo floats through the thick air like a thread, winding into your ribcage, and you drink. It tastes like mud soaked in regret, an old tree bark. It burns down the back of your throat and curls in your stomach like a sleeping animal that just woke up. And then everything begins to unravel. You wake up the next morning, if you can call that night's sleep. Your body feels like a garment worn inside out. Your skin's too loud. The birds are mocking you. Even the breeze seems smug. But the real change, it's inside. The diet has begun to do its work. And no, it's not a cleanse. This isn't about losing weight or fitting into a spiritual bikini. This is a systematic deconstruction of everything your body thinks it is. Food suspicious. Pleasure dangerous. Cravings, weapons of sabotage planted by the ego. You're being emptied out, physically, emotionally, metaphysically, to make room, because the spirits don't share. They want a clean house. The Shipibo, Motses, and Ashaninka, shamans, say the plants you ingest aren't just medicine, they're teachers. And teachers don't care if your tongue screams. You're drinking Karik Sanango, which numbs your limbs and makes your dreams flicker like dying torches. You're chewing ayasacha, which tastes like angry garlic and smells worse coming back up. You might even be given toh, the terrifying Brugmansia flower reserved for the brave, the reckless, or the already halfway gone. The diet strips you raw. Your body starts to react. First, in whispers, nausea, headaches, odd itches. Then, in screams, violent purging, body chills, uncontrollable shaking. You lose your taste for things. All things. Food, talking, even the sight of other people feels abrasive. And then the dreams start. Not the gentle subconscious shuffle of modern sleep. No, these are dreams that burst in like unwanted visitors, fully formed, painfully vivid, and aggressively symbolic. You're shown bones, blood, an animal tearing itself in two and asking you questions in a voice that sounds like your father's if he'd been born a tree. You're not dreaming about spirits, you're being taught by them. Sometimes the dreams aren't dreams. You wake up with muddy feet and no idea how you left your hammock. You find yourself whispering songs you've never learned. You see lights behind your eyelids, faces in the fire, geometry in the leaves. The plants are opening you up, loosening your boundaries like threads unraveling in water. And you feel it, a kind of inside-outness. You begin to sense things before they happen. You can smell people's moods. The jungle speaks in 1,000 voices, and for the first time, you understand every single one, and none of them are friendly. And your maestro, he watches, listens, smokes, sings when needed. He doesn't comfort. Comfort would be dangerous. Comfort would interrupt the process, because you're not supposed to feel okay. You're being made into something new, something hollowed out, something that can contain voices that aren't yours. And here's the cruel irony. The weaker you feel, the more the elders nod with approval. You vomit into a leaf and someone says, "Good." You cry for 3 hours and someone mutters, "She's almost ready." You collapse in your hammock, convinced your organs are rearranging themselves alphabetically. And the maestro casually remarks, "They're starting to teach you," and you believe him. Because it's not just your body anymore, it's theirs, too. You think the worst has passed. You've made it through the forest isolation. You've kept the diet, no salt, no sex, no touching, no flavor, no fun. Your stomach's been emptied like a storage shed. Your dreams are full-blown telenovelas, starring dead relatives and talking snakes. And you've gotten used to the idea that your body is not entirely yours anymore. But you're still wrong, because the spirits haven't entered yet. Not fully. What you've felt so far, the visions, the nausea, the creeping awareness of being watched, those were just rehearsals. The real show starts without warning, and when it does, there's no gentle onboarding, no briefing, no, so here's what to expect. One moment, you're sitting in ceremony, breathing deeply through your nostrils like your maestro showed you. The next, you're shaking uncontrollably, and your mouth is saying things your mind never approved. Welcome to your first possession. It doesn't begin with an announcement. It starts with heat. A wave crawling up your spine like a fever with opinions. Your skin goes tight. Your arms tingle. You feel like you've swallowed a thunderstorm that's trying to punch its way out. Your breath quickens, but your chest stays still, as if your lungs have politely stepped aside for something else to use the equipment. Then your limbs start moving, not trembling, moving, controlled, deliberate, and not by you. Maybe your hands lift. Maybe your torso begins to sway. Maybe you begin to sing, and it's a song you've never learned, in a language you've never spoken. The people around you lean forward. Some smile, some look concerned. Your maestro watches like a man measuring wind before a fire. And still, you're not entirely gone. There's a small piece of you watching from the back, horrified, fascinated, embarrassed. You're the audience in your own body. This is normal. Among the Shipibo and the Matses, the first true possession is a threshold moment. It tells the elders whether the spirits you've invited are cooperating or devouring. Not all spirits are kind. Some enter like teachers, others like drunks with a grudge. They can make you dance. They can make you scream. They can make you throw up and laugh and weep all at once. They might make you mimic animals, roll in the dirt, or chant in perfect sync with the maestro's song, even though you've never sung before. And if that sounds terrifying, it is, but it's also sacred, because you're not hallucinating. You're not role-playing. This isn't an altered state. This is a spirit moving in like a new tenant, rearranging the furniture and ignoring your personal space. Your body becomes a tool, a channel, a borrowed costume. Sometimes it lasts minutes, sometimes hours. Time bends in the grip of the otherworldly. And when it ends, when the spirit leaves and you collapse into a heap of sweat and have remembered syllables, you feel like you've been scraped clean with a rusty spoon. You're exhausted, empty, shaking, high on nothing. But here's the twist. Everyone's thrilled. The maestro gives a slow nod, maybe claps softly. A few elders whisper and smile. Someone offers you warm river water. You just made it to the next level. You were possessed and survived. You didn't lose your mind yet. Didn't run into the forest yet. Didn't accidentally insult a deity by mispronouncing their name during a purge. You're still here mostly, and now it's official. You're open, which means the spirits can come and go. Anytime, day or night, ceremony or not, in dreams, or while urinating behind a tree. You've invited them in, and not all of them knock before entering. You wake up the morning after your first possession with your face half in the dirt, a mosquito bite on your eyelid, and the distinct feeling that your spine isn't speaking to you anymore. You sit up slowly, like a building checking its own foundation. The taste in your mouth is halfway between burnt leaves and someone else's memories. You're sore in places you didn't know had nerves, and you're not alone. He's there, the maestro. Or maybe she. Or maybe they. Doesn't matter, they're always there. Somehow both human and slightly more than human, perched like a buzzard with a first aid kit. They don't ask how you feel. They already know. They've seen that look before, the one that says, I may have just given birth to the moon through my forehead. The maestro's job is part guide, part guardian, part cryptic spiritual bouncer. They're the reason you haven't gone full gibbering mess in the forest. Not yet. See, among the Shipibo Kanibo, Ashaninka, and Yawanawa, the shaman doesn't just chant pretty songs and light nice-smelling herbs. They are the firewall, the spiritual negotiator, the air traffic controller between dimensions. And now that you're open, they're responsible for keeping your channel from becoming a supernatural free-for-all. They do this with song ikaros, intricate, inherited, often channeled melodies that act like tuning forks for reality. They don't just sing at you. They sing into you. Each note is targeted, specific, aimed at the thing behind your eyes. One ikaro might call in a healing plant. Another might banish a spirit that's overstayed its welcome. Another still might help you vomit out something you picked up that isn't exactly yours. And when you start trembling again, because, let's be honest, you do, they adjust. They sing louder, softer, faster, like they're surfing your nervous system by sound. Sometimes they use tobacco, mapacho, blowing thick clouds around your head, your heart, your belly. Not for aroma, for purification. The smoke acts like armor, like glue, like a firm no whispered into your aura. You cough, they don't care. That was the point. Sometimes they whistle, sometimes they spit, Sometimes they chant in a language that doesn't have a name anymore, only vibration. You don't understand it, but your bones seem to. And they're always watching, not just to protect you, but to assess you. Every reaction you have is noted. Did you resist the spirit? Did you let it in to isolate? Did you try to control it? Or did you surrender? Did you start dancing, crying? Did your eyes go blank like a radio tuning into another station? They're not judging, they're diagnosing because they've been through it. They know what it means to lose your body and survive the return trip. And they know the signs of someone becoming a real shaman, or someone slipping into madness. And yes, they do talk to the spirits, not in a metaphorical, isn't this poetic way, actual conversations. Mid-ceremony, they might pause, lean to the side, and start mumbling toward a corner of the hut. They're negotiating rent with an invisible wasp. You learn not to interrupt. It might be your kidneys they're trying to rescue. In the worst moments, when you've started convulsing, or crying uncontrollably, or chanting things in a voice to octaves below your own, they intervene gently, firmly. They don't panic. They've seen worse. And in Amazonian traditions, if you truly lose control, they're the ones who will fight the spirit for you, using song, smoke, prayer, and whatever else they have in that mystery bag. You start to wonder, are they still human? Did they ever stop being possessed themselves? But you don't ask. You just lie back, mouth dry, heart fluttering like a moth in a jar, and try not to choke on the next wave of visions, because you're not done yet, not even close. Let's not sugarcoat it. Possession isn't always a beautiful channeling of light and cosmic hugs. Sometimes it's war. And guess where the battlefield is? If you're lucky, the spirits slip in, borrow your voice, maybe sing a few healing songs, and leave you gently glowing like a sacred nightlight. But if you're really lucky, in the cursed, mythological, testival kind of way, they fight over you, inside you, through you. You become a psychic coliseum. The elders have a name for it, of course. The Shipibo might call it a Shantaroshi moment, when the body becomes a battleground for conflicting forces. Sometimes it's a test, sometimes it's punishment, sometimes, let's be honest, it's just two ancient entities settling a score, and your nervous system is the most convenient arena. What does it feel like? Imagine your skin trying to leave. Imagine your tongue stiffening into a shape that doesn't belong in your mouth. Imagine laughter bubbling up and then turning into sobs halfway through, not metaphorically, physically. Your diaphragm can't decide who it's working for. Some initiates convulse, some go rigid, some scream, bark, chant, or thrash so violently they injure themselves. Others go completely still, not peaceful, but vacant, pupils wide, limbs limp, head tilted just slightly, wrong, like a puppet whose strings are tangled in 3 different hands. And it's not random. The body starts doing things with meaning. Your arms might trace symbols in the air. Your voice might chant curses or blessings in ancient patterns. Your stomach might churn like something's crawling upward from the inside. You might vomit up a string of phlegm so long and so alive-looking that everyone in the hut gasps. That's considered progress, because many Amazonian cultures don't see these as symptoms of sickness. They're signs of contact. The spirits aren't here to be polite. They're here to initiate, to clean, correct, or consume, and the only way out is through. Sometimes, 2 spirits enter at once, one kind, one not. And you feel it, that internal tug-of-war, where you are the rope. One side lifts your hand to offer healing, the other clenches your fingers into a fist. One speaks in a soft hum, the other roars through your throat like a drunk storm god, trying to recite poetry. It's terrifying. But the elders, they nod. They blow more tobacco. They say things like, she's becoming strong, or he's being tested. You want to ask, tested for what? But your teeth are clenched, and your jaw is moving like it's chewing shadows. And here's the dark little secret. No one steps in too quickly. The maestro watches, yes. They'll intervene if the spirit starts burning you from the inside, or threatens your life. But for the most part, you're expected to survive this, on your own. Not because they're cruel, but because the ability to endure, to stay conscious while 2 unseen entities argue using your spine, is what marks a real apprentice. And if you lose consciousness, if your soul slips out and doesn't come back right away, they wait. Sometimes they whistle, sometimes they sing, sometimes they shake a rattle or pour cold water down your back, but mostly, they just wait, because this part isn't about control. It's about surrender without collapse. And if you come back, you'll feel like you've aged 5 years. You'll be weak, trembling, half delirious. You might laugh for no reason, or cry when someone hands you water. You'll feel haunted, cracked, tender, but you'll also feel unmistakably that something shifted. The war is never really over, but now you know the rules. By now, you've been possessed. You've shaken, chanted, cried, collapsed. You've seen jaguars where there were only shadows, and heard names whispered through the mosquito netting. You've survived spiritual warfare, which is more than most people can say after a rough weekend. You think the worst is over. It's not, because the possession doesn't just happen to you, it stays with you, and it starts carving itself into your body in ways no one warned you about. First, your appetite, gone. You look at a boiled plantain and feel like it's mocking you. The idea of salt makes your tongue twitch. The idea of meat makes your stomach coil in fear. Your body rejects everything that once gave it pleasure, and accepts only what the spirits approve. Spoiler, they approve of very little. Then there's the heat, not outside, inside. You'll feel a slow burn rise from your pelvis to your chest, like someone lit a candle in your liver and forgot to blow it out. Some initiates break out in fevers that come and go like tide. No infection, no cause, just heat that makes the air buzz. You'll shiver anyway. The chills follow the heat like a bad lover, showing up uninvited and refusing to leave. Some nights you wrap yourself in every cloth you own and still feel like your bones are made of ice water and old curses. Your skin starts to tingle, itch, crawl. Not all at once in patterns. Your arms buzz like they're remembering a snake that touched them once in a dream. Your feet twitch as if they're about to walk somewhere without your permission. You might lose feeling in your hands for hours, and when it returns, they feel like they're carrying something invisible and heavy. Then there's the purging. Yes, that kind. The spirits love a good purge. You'll vomit, not just food but memory, emotion, grief you didn't know you were carrying. Sometimes it comes out as bile, sometimes as black sludge, occasionally as foam. If you're really lucky, it sparkles, but don't ask why. You might also purge the other way, violently, frequently, and often at inconvenient ceremonial moments. This is treated as holy. By the way, people will nod respectfully while you evacuate your soul into a bush. Your joints ache, your spine cracks. You wake up with bruises you don't remember earning. Your breath shortens, lengthens, stops entirely for seconds at a time, while something inside adjusts your rhythm. Your heartbeat slows one day and races the next. None of this is diagnosable. All of it is normal. And the voices, you'll hear them, yes, but you'll also feel them pressing against your lungs, crawling up your throat, humming behind your teeth. Some try to speak through you. Some just rattle the windows of your ribcage to remind you they're still in there. And the laughter, not yours. Sometimes, mid-ceremony, a high-pitched giggle escapes your mouth like a balloon losing air. You're not amused. No one is amused. The maestro might just raise an eyebrow and begin singing again, slightly louder this time. Sleep becomes a negotiation. You wake every hour, sweating, or freezing, or whispering in a tongue you forgot by morning. You dream in colors you don't have words for, and wake up with songs stuck in your throat like splinters. And somehow, through all of this, you're expected to sit upright, listen to your teacher, keep drinking your herbs, and not go completely mad, because the spirits are still testing you, still fine-tuning their instrument. And if you think this is as strange as it gets, wait until you find out how everyone else starts treating you. By now, your body is a flickering antenna for things unseen. You've been cracked open, spiritually fumigated, and repurposed. The spirits have moved in like eccentric house guests, with no plans to leave. You're dizzy, exhausted, occasionally lucid, and, most importantly, no longer private, because once the possession begins, everyone is watching. Not obviously. No one points and stares. That would be rude, but they watch. From the corners of the communal hut, from behind woven mats, from across the fire with a half-averted gaze and a bowl of cassava they've been pretending to stir for the last 20 minutes. Among the Ashaninka, Shipibo, and other Upper Amazonian groups, this is standard practice. Once a possession has occurred, the community begins a slow, silent evaluation. You're no longer just someone's nephew, daughter, cousin. You're a spiritual variable, a walking, twitching question mark. They want to know, is it real? And more importantly, is it safe? Children whisper, adults murmur, elders glance sideways. The woman who taught you how to roast fish now lights mapacho every time you walk by, which might be a compliment or a subtle warning. The guy who used to joke with you won't make eye contact. Your cousin stands too far away, then too close, then too far again. It's not cruelty, it's caution. Because the possessed can be dangerous, not in a Hollywood demon possession kind of way, but in a deeply ancestral, very practical way. You might speak something true at the wrong moment. You might feel someone's secret without meaning to. You might call in a spirit without realizing it, and now the whole village has to deal with the fallout. Your presence becomes charged, and people test you, gently, passively, but unmistakably. Someone asks you to sing a song, not to entertain, but to see which voice comes out. A child offers you food, just to check whether you'll accept it. A grandmother mutters your name near the fire to see if you flinch. Your dreams, interpreted. Your posture noted. Even your silences carry weight now. And hovering above it all, your maestro. Their judgment matters most. They listen when you speak in trance. They track your behavior, your receivings, your reactions to rituals. If you stumble mid-possession, they remember. If you hesitate before drinking the plant brew, they remember. If you smile too long at a certain fire, or get too quiet when someone cries, it all goes into the invisible report card they're building in their mind. No one says you're being evaluated. That would ruin the purity of it. But you are. Every sneeze, every sudden laughter, every muttered phrase in a voice not quite your own. These are signs. Either you're aligning with the spirits in a good way, or something is going very wrong. And heaven help you if you become too interesting. Because then, people start visiting aunties, distant cousins, curious neighbors, the village skeptics. They show up at your ceremonial space with small offerings, soft questions, too wide smiles. They pretend they're there for support. They're not. They want to see you twitch. They want to see the eyes roll back. They want to hear the voice that isn't yours. And if nothing happens, they nod politely and leave, whispering that maybe the spirits changed their minds. But if something does happen, then you're no longer just a novice. You're a channel, a tool, a mystery, a potential threat. And you'd better start learning how to carry that title without falling apart, because no one's going to stop watching anytime soon. Let's say the spirits have visited you 5, 6 times now, maybe more. You've lost count. You've shaken, screamed, cried into the jungle floor. You've thrown up truths and swallowed fears and forgotten your own name at least twice. Congratulations, that was the easy part. Now comes the one thing your nervous system, your pride, and your cultural conditioning weren't prepared for. Surrender, not the symbolic kind, not the inspirational Instagram kind, the actual body level, terror-stained kind, the kind where you let go, not because you're brave, but because resistance has become too painful to maintain. You learn quickly. Fighting possession doesn't keep you safe, it just makes it worse. The more you clench, the more the spirit pushes. The more you analyze, the more your brain becomes a liability. And the more you try to stay grounded, the more violently you are ripped from the illusion that you ever had ground to begin with. Among the Yawanawa, Kaksinawa, and Shipibo traditions, surrender is not weakness, it's alignment. The spirits are not here to negotiate with your ego, they're here to reshape you. And you cannot be reshaped while clinging to the blueprint. At first, it feels like death. You feel yourself slipping your thoughts, your name, your grip on the now. Your hands move, your jaw slackens, your breath shortens into something less yours and more borrowed. And this time, you don't fight it. You don't scream. You stop being the thing this is happening to, and become the space it's happening through. Suddenly, you're singing, not because someone asked, not because you want to, but because it's flowing out of you like a river that just found a broken dam. The song is strong, strange, melodic. Your voice isn't your voice. It's deeper, or higher, or both. You don't remember the lyrics afterward, but people nod, elders smile, someone weeps softly behind you, and your maestro they begin to sing with you. That's the sign. You're not just channeling anymore, you're co-creating. You also start moving differently. Your hands perform gestures you didn't study. Your body sways in sync with the Akaro, even when your conscious mind is off somewhere watching from the ceiling. Sometimes you reach towards someone without knowing why. Later, you'll be told that you spoke their ancestor's name, or identified an illness no one had diagnosed. You won't remember, but they will. And eventually when it's all over, you'll collapse, gently, quietly, not in fear, in release, as if your bones finally agreed to stop pretending they're made of anything solid. Someone lays a cloth over your shoulders. Someone else murmurs that the spirit was pleased. The air feels lighter. So do you. Because here's the secret they don't write down. Surrender doesn't mean losing. It means becoming usable. The spirits don't want you dead. They want you pliable, like a flute. Hollow, yes, but capable of carrying songs you could never invent on your own. And when you rise again, still trembling, still hollowed out, the others look at you differently. Not with fear, with familiarity, because now, you're one of them, the vessels, the ones who let go. And just when you think it's over, the maestro looks at you and says softly, "Now, they'll begin to teach you." Here's the part no one outside the forest ever seems to understand. The learning doesn't begin until you've stopped trying to learn. You don't study shamanism the way you'd study a subject. There are no textbooks, no quizzes, no cheerful lectures about chlorophyll. There's no certificate at the end that says congratulations, you are now a qualified intermediary between worlds. Instead, once you've surrendered truly, deeply, the spirits begin to teach you the only way they know how. By becoming the lesson. It starts in dreams, not the soft kind where your teeth fall out or you forget your locker combination. No, these are teaching dreams, full color, full sound, full body immersion. You're in a cave, or a river, or floating above a jungle lit by veins of electric green. An animal appears, a jaguar, a boa, a deer with too many eyes. It speaks without moving, and what it says isn't words, it's knowing. Whole songs arrive in a flash. Plant names whisper themselves into your blood. A vision slices through your chest and leaves you gasping. You wake up singing. Again, in a language you didn't learn. You write it down. You forget it. You sing it again later during ceremony, flawlessly. Among the Shipibo Kanibo, this is expected. They say the Ikaros, the sacred healing songs, are not composed, but received. You don't create them. You remember them from somewhere deeper. Somewhere the spirits kept them until you were finally emptied out enough to carry them. And it's not just songs. You begin to understand plants differently. You touch a vine and feel its temperature, its sound, its particular flavor of warning. You sit near a tree and know, without knowing how, whether it heals fevers or drives people mad. The knowledge doesn't pass through the intellect. It lands somewhere behind the sternum and blooms sideways. You also begin to feel illnesses. This is perhaps the strangest part. Someone walks past you and suddenly your chest aches, or your left eye twitches, or your stomach growls in a way that isn't yours. You're told that this is how the spirits signal. You're feeling them through someone else. And if you're attuned enough, you'll know exactly what to do. Sometimes you don't even have to think. You just start blowing smoke, or singing, or touching someone's knee while muttering a phrase you've never said before. Later, they'll thank you. Later, they'll tell you the pain is gone. You'll nod like you meant it, even though half the time, you didn't even know what you were doing, only that it wasn't you doing it. It's not always poetic. Sometimes the teachings are brutal. You might be woken in the middle of the night by a soundless voice commanding you to go sit outside in the rain. For hours, you might be shown visions of death, yours, someone else's, 1,000 generations of it, stacked like dry leaves. You might be pushed to drink something bitter and unnamed, and wake up covered in sweat and spiderwebs, convinced your spine has been replaced by a river. These are all lessons, and if you ask your maestro what it means, they'll shrug, maybe smile, maybe offer a riddle involving monkeys, because they're not the teacher now, the spirits are, and the spirits don't teach the way humans do. They don't explain, they transmit. You don't get the luxury of context, you get raw experience, and your job is to survive it, remember what matters, and forget what doesn't burn itself into your bones. And when you try to explain it to others, even those who've been there, you'll find the words won't fit. They bend, they warp, they vanish, because some teachings are for your mouth, but the real ones, they're kept in your bones. For later, eventually, someone decides you're ready to come back. There's no ceremony, no ribbon cutting, no official declaration, just a quiet morning where your maestro hands you a bowl of warm plantain, says nothing, and gestures toward the path leading back to the village. You walk it slowly, barefoot, heartbeat weirdly loud in your ears. The forest doesn't look different, but you do. Or rather, the space between you and everything else feels thinner, more permeable. The trees watch you now, not metaphorically. You feel their gaze. And when you step out into the clearing, into the place where people still argue about cassava and complain about firewood. It's as if you've returned from somewhere no one else quite believes in. Because here's the truth, coming back is harder than leaving. Reintegration sounds gentle, it isn't. You've just spent days, weeks being dissolved and reassembled by forces with no regard for your comfort. Now you're supposed to smile, eat, make small talk. Your body still tingles. Your dreams still spit out jungle riddles. Your sense of self is like a loose robe, slipping off your shoulders at the worst moments. And the others, they pretend not to notice. Sort of. No one says, "Welcome back, newly possessed channel of the ancient." They say things like, "You've gotten thinner," or "Your eyes are different." Children stare. Elders nod at you with a new kind of weight behind their silence. Someone hands you food and watches how you eat it. Someone else makes the sign of protection when they pass you, just in case. You're not one of them anymore. Not entirely. You've entered the gray space. No longer a novice. Not yet a shaman. You've been touched, claimed, brushed by the gods and returned with just enough else in your face that people keep their sentences short. And you try to act normal. You try to sit in the circle like you used to. You try to chop wood without crying. You try not to flinch when someone laughs too loudly or sings in a tone that triggers a memory of spirits entering through your ears. You smile at children. You chew your food slowly. You nod when someone tells a joke, even though you barely understand language the way you used to, because something inside you is still echoing, still vibrating. You feel it behind your ribs, not an entity, not a voice, but a presence, a faint hum that never stops. It watches with you, sleeps with you, breathes under your breath, and the worst part, you miss the other world. Not all of it, not the vomiting or the spiritual maulings, but the clarity, the precision, the sense that every sound, every breeze, every insect leg twitching on a leaf meant something. Out here, in the realm of the living, things are blurry again. People lie. Food has flavor, but no spirit. Words return, but feel hollow. The spirits still visit in dreams, in flashes, when you're alone in the forest and accidentally hum the wrong melody. But it's different now. You're not being reshaped. You're being tested. Can you carry the spirits without letting them devour your personality? Can you walk among the living without accidentally dragging the dead with you? Because possession doesn't end when the spirit leaves. It ends when you can contain it, silently, daily, politely, while still being able to tie your hammock and say good morning without glowing. And most people can't. Let's say you've made it through the possessions. You've endured the purging, the trembling, the voices, the visions, the whispers from trees that shouldn't know your name. You've walked the line, bent without breaking, returned to the village with most of your limbs and a song or two burned into your bloodstream. People nod when you pass. The maestro even lets you sit a little closer now. And yet, deep down, there's a tiny thought that keeps circling like a vulture that knows something you don't. Am I losing it? Because here's the dark reality. Not everyone comes back whole. Not every initiate finishes the training with a shining aura and a folder full of plant songs. Some break, some vanish, some stare too long into the spirit world and forget which side of the river they were born on. And in the Amazon, they don't call it schizophrenia. They don't call it bipolar or psychotic episode. They call it to open. Too many doors, not enough locks. The kind of openness where anything can enter, and does. The signs start small, talking to things that aren't there and not in the sacred way. Forgetting your name, your family, your body. Laughing at inappropriate times, walking into the river at night and whispering to the piranhas, refusing to eat, convinced your organs have been replaced with snakes, singing yucaros while bleeding from the nose, standing still for hours while something inside negotiates your fate with a passing insect. And the community watches, with pity, with fear, with that same quiet calculation used when someone's caught a fever too strong for the plants to handle. Because they know the spirits don't just give gifts. Sometimes they take your clarity, your voice, your sleep, your ability to speak in straight lines. And worst of all, they take your usefulness. Because in these cultures, Sipibo, Matsihenka, Kaksunawa, being possessed isn't enough. You have to be functional. You have to heal, guide, interpret. If you're just a person babbling in 3 languages no one taught you while smearing charcoal on your face and insisting you married the river, you're not a shaman, you're a cautionary tale, and everyone knows one. Some live on the edge of the village, tended to but never spoken of. Some disappear entirely into the forest, into silence, into themselves. Some are helped by other shamans, who may or may not be trying to extract a stubborn spirit, or simply trying to contain the damage. You might hear drumming at night. You might see smoke in the trees. You might never see them again. And here's the cruel part. No one can predict who will cross that line. It's not about strength. Some of the strongest break. It's not about intelligence. Some of the sharpest minds dissolve like salt in VT. It's about balance, about holding contradiction without collapsing under it, about carrying fire and not setting yourself ablaze. And the risk never goes away. Even if you make it, even if you become respected, even feared, the madness waits. It lingers behind your eyelids on restless nights. It hums at the edge of ceremonies when your maestro falters. It visits in dreams that don't end when you wake. You walk with it like a shadow made of wind, because to be a vessel is to be porous, and every door that opens ... stays open. So you learn to walk carefully, to shield your mind with prayers, with tobacco, with songs. You learn when to step back, when to lie down, when to mutter nonsense to yourself, until your feet remember which way is human. You learn to survive. Barely. Here's the thing. The first possessions were never really yours. They happened to you. They arrived uninvited, loud, chaotic, terrifying, like spiritual home invasions with bad manners and no exit plan. You didn't control them. You barely survived them. But if you've made it this far, if the maestro hasn't sent you home, if your dreams haven't swallowed you whole, if the madness still circles but doesn't roost, then you've reached the turning point. Now, you must become a vessel on purpose. And that's a different game entirely. You start to notice it first in your breath, how it changes before the spirits arrive. A tremor in the ribs, a stillness in the throat, then the way your palms heat up during a ceremony, not from fear, but from readiness. The signs you used to dread now feel like tools, like your body is learning to prepare itself. The real change you call them in. No more waiting to be hijacked mid-vomit. No more hoping the maestro sings the right echo before your soul leaves the building. Now, you open your mouth and invite them, and they come. You whistle, hum. You call with a low chant passed to you in a dream. You light mapacho and blow it across your chest, your hands, your feet. You sing a song you received after nearly drowning in your own visions, and suddenly the air shifts. Something moves through your jaw. Your hands begin their work. And you're not possessed in the eye blacked out and woke up under a treeway anymore. You're inhabited with awareness. You're present. And so is something else. You're both in the room, sharing the space. Like co-pilots who occasionally fight over the controls, but mostly trust each other not to crash. Among the Huni, Kuin, Yawanawa, and other forest peoples, this is the mark of real apprenticeship. Not that you were chosen, but that you learned how to choose. You control the when, the how, and most importantly, the who, because not all spirits are welcome. And now, you know the difference. Some come with healing, soft, cool, instructive. Others arrive with heat, demand, seduction. You recognize their signatures now. The way a musician recognizes a key change or a hunter. Here's the difference between bird call and warning. You also learn to send them away. You sing them out. You use smoke, perfume, silence. You blow into someone's crown and tell the thing hiding behind their ribs that it's overstayed its welcome. And sometimes it leaves. Sometimes it argues. Sometimes it laughs and says, "We'll see." You're learning boundaries. But in this world, boundaries aren't walls. They're agreements. Between you and the unseen. Between what you'll allow and what you won't. Between what your body can carry and what will break you if you try. Your maestro begins to treat you differently. Less like an apprentice, more like a fellow. They test you, hand you a difficult case, a dying patient, a child who hasn't spoken in weeks. You sit by the fire, breathe deeply, and wait until your ribs crack open like a ceremonial gourd. And when the spirit arrives, you let it in, calmly, precisely, with purpose. You begin to understand why the old shamans walk so slowly, why they laugh at strange times, why they stare into the distance during feast days, because they're never entirely alone, because they've made peace with the voices. Because at any moment, they might be called, and they're ready. And you're becoming one of them. You still get scared. Of course, some nights, the air tastes wrong. Some dreams come with teeth. But you don't run. You don't tremble. You pour your tobacco. You hum your song. You face the spirit like an old friend who once tried to kill you but now just wants to talk. and the forest nods, because you're not fighting the current anymore. You are the current. You think there will be a finish line, a moment when the training ends. The spirits thank you for your service, and you get to go back to being a regular person who sleeps 8 hours and doesn't hear voices in the wind. There isn't, because once you've been opened, you don't close. Not fully. You don't go back. Not really. You may walk among the living, eat fish with your hands, tease the children, nod respectfully at elders, but there's a part of you that never quite re-enters the world of the human. You are now, and forever, a threshold. It shows up in quiet ways. You sit down to rest, and a sudden image flashes behind your eyes. A woman you haven't seen in months, weeping. You find her later and she tells you her father just died. You walk past a plant and feel a buzzing in your chest, and later someone mentions their fever was broken after sitting beside it. You stop touching certain objects. You avoid certain foods on instinct. You recognize the smell of sickness before it speaks. No one teaches you this. The spirits do. They don't ask permission anymore. They just murmur when needed. They come in dreams, often without metaphor. You'll be shown exactly what to do, how to heal, how to sing, how to prepare a specific brew. You might forget to eat that day. You might forget your own name, but the song will be perfect. And when you try to be alone, truly alone, you realize that solitude too has changed. There's always something there, watching, not threatening, not necessarily benevolent, just there. A presence behind your breath, a weight in the silence. Sometimes it hums with you. Sometimes it just listens. Sometimes it speaks in the voice of a bird or an old man you never met, but have always known. At night, you dream not for yourself, but for others. A neighbor's illness, a hunter's mistake, a child's spiritual inheritance, all arrive in your sleep, like uninvited guests demanding tea and interpretation, and you give it, because that's the deal. You are not possessed anymore. You are inhabited, and that's different. It's quieter, subtler, more insidious. You can go days without any drama, only to suddenly feel a presence lean forward during a conversation, and you say something that isn't yours. A sentence, a warning, a diagnosis, and everyone goes still. They know what you carry. You are respected, sometimes feared, occasionally resented. You eat alone more often now. People treat you kindly, but carefully, like someone holding a burning feather, and you learn to live with it. The duality, the in-between. You keep your diet. You smoke when you need protection. You fast when dreams get cloudy. You sing to the trees when your bones feel heavy. You speak only when you must. You know when the spirit is present. You know when it leaves. And you know, with a kind of soft horror, that it never leaves for long. You belong to the forest now, or maybe the forest belongs to you. Because the truth is, once you've been the house of something greater, emptiness no longer feels empty. It feels wrong, abandoned, cold. So you fill it again, not with ego, not with ambition, but with breath, song, smoke, vision. You let the spirits move through you, not as intruders, but as old friends, with sacred keys to the rooms inside your ribs, and you walk softly through the world, never alone. There are places so cold the air forgets how to move, places where silence doesn't just fall, it piles up, like snowdrifts against the skin of the earth. And in these places, ecstasy looks nothing like what most imagine. It doesn't writhe or shake. It doesn't moan or shout. It sits, perfectly still, in the middle of a blizzard, eyes rolled back behind frostbitten lids, lips parted in a breath that never quite leaves. For Arctic shamans, particularly among the Chukchi, the Inuit, the Owenki, and the Yukagir, the body was not a vessel to be stirred, but stilled. Trance wasn't found through movement or music. It was something the cold offered, like a knife offers silence. Heat makes the body sing. Cold teaches it to listen. Where steppe shamans danced and Mongolian spiritualists galloped in circles to the beat of drums, the spiritual technicians of the Arctic sat, and they froze. Not metaphorically, quite literally. There are recorded accounts from ethnographies and polar missionaries who describe it with the dry horror of men trying to sound neutral while watching someone slowly become a statue. One moment, the shaman is breathing, muttering, swaying in a reindeer hide tent. The next, they're silent, locked in place, pupils dilated, limbs rigid, snow melting on the skin only to refreeze, and no one panics. In fact, the freezing is often expected. welcomed, even because the body, according to the worldview passed down in hushed tones across ice and generations, had to leave behind its animal needs: hunger, pain, warmth, to access the world beyond. The spirits didn't want warmth, they didn't trust it. It's too messy, too alive, too loud. The Arctic cold, on the other hand, made everything simpler. There's a certain clarity that only comes when your eyelashes are glued shut with frost and your teeth have forgotten what chewing is. When the heart slows and the extremities go numb, a new kind of awareness blooms. Call it death adjacent, call it the still zone. Shamans called it the threshold. The cold wasn't just background scenery, it was the gatekeeper. The spirits of the wind, of the ancestors, of the animals, were thought to live just beyond that numbing veil. It was only by sitting long enough still enough for the warmth to leave the bones that the doorway opened. Movement would close it, talking would scare it off, heat would offend it. And so they waited, buried in snow, or half covered in animal skins, until the boundary softened and their breath slipped somewhere else. There are accounts of shamans falling into this trance while outside, mid-step, and waking hours later surrounded by a circle of wolf prints. Others entered it, seated in frozen tents with whalebone frames, while their apprentices whispered prayers and tried not to blink too loud. And if they came back, they'd describe visions so vivid and strange they left their own language behind, trying to recount them. Northern lights speaking in bone-rattling hums, the dead walking in lines beneath the ocean, the sun cracking open like an egg, dripping souls into the snow. Of course, there were skeptics. There always are. Early Russian observers called it catalepsy. Missionaries called it possession. But those who lived with the cold knew better. Knew that stillness wasn't a sign of failure, was the required offering. Because in the Arctic, death is always nearby. And just sometimes, pretending to be dead is the only way to get its attention. And speaking of death, some shamans took it a step further. They didn't just mimic the corpse. They became it, if only for a while. There's a particular kind of shamanic trance that doesn't look like trance at all. It looks like rigor mortis, joints locked, breath slowed to something that barely qualifies as living, skin glazed with a bluish sheen that would send most villagers running for the burial sled. But in the Arctic, death was not always the end. Sometimes, it was the door. Among the Chukchi and Yukagir, the practice of freezing into trance was not theatrical, it was anatomical. The body was trained to hover at the edge of shutdown. This wasn't metaphor or myth. Ethnography Valdemar Bogoras, working with the Jessup North Pacific Expedition, noted more than once that shamans would enter states so deep, so convincingly lifeless, that onlookers debated whether to intervene or wait. And the general consensus was, wait. A dead body, after all, is quiet, and quiet was sacred. It was said that spirits didn't trust the living. Too much pulse, too much hunger, so the shaman would give up those signs. Not symbolically entirely. One Awenki account describes a shaman buried up to his neck in snow, cross-legged, eyes open but unmoving, for nearly 12 hours. When he finally stirred, his beard had frozen solid to his chest, and when he spoke, it wasn't with his own voice. This imitation of death wasn't a trick, it was protocol. One didn't simply walk into the underworld demanding answers. You had to enter in the correct form. And the correct form, naturally, was a corpse. In this worldview, spirit travel required a passport, and that passport was hypothermia. The death trance wasn't isolated to individuals. Whole communities revolved around its rituals. When a shaman fell into stillness, their village held breath with them. No fires lit, no dogs unleashed, no loud talk. It was said the spirits hovered close, easily startled. So silence blanketed the living like snow. Some families describe preparing for these events weeks in advance, fasting alongside the shaman, building special shelters where cold could creep in unchallenged. In a land where heat is survival, choosing to surrender it was the ultimate spiritual offering. It was also the ultimate gamble. Sometimes, the shaman didn't come back, and yet, this was considered necessary. The deeper the stillness, the more trusted the vision. A minor trance one that left the shaman twitching or murmuring might yield a warning about bad weather or a sick reindeer, but a full death mimicry that might reveal the soul theft behind a child's fever, or the path a recently deceased hunter's ghost had taken, whether it reached the sky or wandered too close to the hungry things beneath the ice. The body itself became a vessel for cold spirits, and in some cases, literally so. There are whispered tales half remembered and mostly denied of shamans buried entirely, snow-packed, with reeds or hollow bones left for breath. 3 days, 4. On the 5th, dug out, shivering and half-blind, they would blink into the firelight and name the spirit that had possessed them. Whether or not those stories are embroidered doesn't change what they meant. Death, in Arctic shamanism, was not the opposite of life. It was its consultant, and anyone wishing to translate its language had to practice the posture of the grave. But stillness alone wasn't enough. The body could freeze. The mind could go silent. Yet there was one more witness in these rituals, those who waited, watched, and sometimes intervened. Because while the shaman embraced death, someone had to stand close enough to wake it up again. It's easy to romanticize trance from a safe distance. Easier still when the one freezing into oblivion isn't your neighbor, your father, your spouse. But for the villagers who watched it unfold, there was nothing theatrical about it. The shaman's ecstasy wasn't performed, it was endured. And those who bore witness knew exactly how thin the ice really was. Imagine a tent made of stitched seal hides, creaking with wind. Inside, a fire flickers low not for warmth, but for visibility. The shaman sits in the center, back hunched, limbs slack. His breath slows, then stops. 10 minutes pass, then 30, then 2 hours. No one moves. Even the dogs seem to know better. It was said the spirits didn't just visit the shaman, they watched the watchers. An unnecessary cough, the creak of a boot, even a poorly timed thought could insult whatever entity hovered near. So the community tiptoed around the trance like mourners at a wake. Except in this case, the corpse might get up and speak with someone else's voice. And when it didn't, that's when fear took root. Because not every trance ended well. There are accounts of shamans waking up disoriented, speech slurred for days, fingers stiff with frost. One Yukagir tale speaks of a shaman who returned from the underworld claiming to have traded his shadow to a bear spirit. For weeks, villagers refused to walk behind him. Another was said to have come back half mad, painting his face with ashes and speaking only in riddles until his death. Yet these stories didn't discourage belief. They did the opposite. The danger was proof. A safe journey meant a shallow one. Real power was costly, and the shaman's body was the receipt. Which is why, during these sessions, someone was always designated as the tether, an apprentice, a spouse, a sister. They'd sit close, bundled in furs, eyes locked on the frozen figure, not praying, just waiting, ready to feed him broth when the lips moved again, ready to massage warmth back into blue fingertips, and, on occasion, ready to accept that it was over, because the line between trance and death was neither poetic nor metaphorical. It was anatomical, and when the community gathered to watch it happen, they weren't seeking entertainment. They were witnessing negotiation between spirit and body, between death and return. Still, fear lingered after the ritual. Children were kept away, not just out of caution, but out of superstition. Some said seeing a shaman return from death marked a child for visions or worse, for madness. Dogs would bark at returning shamans, refusing food for days. Food itself had to be reintroduced carefully. A spoon of fermented fish, a sip of melted snow. Too much too soon, and the body could collapse under the weight of being alive again. But most haunting of all were the eyes. Villagers often spoke of the gaze that returned from those trances. Not wild, not broken, just ... wrong. Like something that had seen too far and was still adjusting to walls, to names, to being called you again. And yet, for all the fear, the community never stopped watching. Because within that stillness was the only hope they had. For healing, for answers, for meaning. And in time, some apprentices began to crave it, the silence, the surrender, the strange authority that came from not blinking when death passed by. Of course, wanting it and surviving it were two different things entirely. The cold had to be earned, and not just once, over and over, trained into the bones like a language that could only be spoken without moving the tongue. Before a shaman could speak with the dead, they had to survive being mistaken for one, and that meant training. Not in the way modern minds think of no mantras, no mentorship circles, no gentle encouragement from community elders. Training, in this case, looked more like voluntary hypothermia, repeatedly, sometimes since childhood. Among the Owenki, the future shaman might be selected after an illness, a seizure, or a disturbing vision, but selection was only the beginning. What followed was a slow, brutal reshaping of the body's relationship to suffering. You learned to fast, not just from food, but from heat. You walked barefoot into snowdrifts. You sat for hours wrapped in wet hides. You slept without fire while others roasted seal fat beside you. And you didn't complain. Not because stoicism was virtuous, but because discomfort was diagnostic. The pain was the test. The trance came later. The apprentice had to learn what stillness actually meant. Not sitting politely, not holding one's breath for effect, but a cellular kind of stillness, where even the teeth forgot their habit of chattering and the body ceased to protest its own disintegration. It wasn't about building tolerance, it was about abandoning resistance, about becoming convincingly corpse-like without actually dying. Some rituals used repetition. A young initiate might be led out to a frozen lake at dawn, instructed to strip to the waist, and then told to remain unmoving while the others chanted from the shore. When he collapsed, or if he would be dragged back, warmed with coals, revived with broth, then they'd do it again next week, maybe every week, maybe for years. Others preferred isolation. A shaman tubi would be sent to a snow-covered rise or a rock outcropping known for its wind, a place where birds didn't land, where wolves didn't linger. There, they'd be told to wait for a sign. From whom? That was never clear. But if they returned early, they weren't ready. If they didn't return at all, the spirits had made their choice. It's worth noting this wasn't cruelty. At least, not in the cultural sense. This was preparation. The spirits were not kind. They didn't favor the easily chilled or the emotionally fragile. To survive the trance, let alone guide others through it, the shaman had to be emptied of softness, or at least taught to carry it somewhere unreachable. And in the midst of this cold endurance, a strange transformation began. Not just of the body, but of attention. Some initiates reported hearing things in the snow. Not voices exactly, but instructions. Shifting patterns in the way ice cracked. Meanings in the wind's stutter. The cold, once enemy, became tutor. Its silence turned sacred. The reward for all this wasn't glory. There were no ceremonies for successful apprentices, no celebratory feast. Usually, the community just started asking you things about dreams, about illnesses, about missing animals, and you answered them with the same stillness you learned on the hill. And if your answers were right, if the child recovered, if the hunt returned, if the ghosts stopped knocking on the walls, then they believed you. Not because you had visions, but because you'd earned them, with your breath, with your body, with your willingness to lie down in the snow and wait for death to introduce itself. But not all spirits waited for such formalities. Some whispered before the body had learned to listen. Spirits that didn't roar or wail. Spirits that spoke only when everything else had gone quiet. There are spirits that demand drums, incense, and songs loud enough to scare the living. But Arctic spirits aren't like that. They don't announce themselves. They don't enter with spectacle. They slip in sideways like frost under a doorframe, like sleep during a long watch. And if there's noise, they don't come at all. This is a region where the divine doesn't perform. It waits. The cosmology woven into the lives of the Inuit, the Yupik, the Chukchit's not one of fiery heavens or golden thrones. It's wind and ice, and the shifting line between what breathes and what doesn't. The gods here aren't radiant or kind. They're cold. Not evil, just indifferent, like the sea, like the storm. And if you want to speak to them, you have to match that indifference. Which is why, in Arctic shamanism, noise was considered a kind of profanity, not just in ritual, but in thought. Stillness wasn't only physical, it was cognitive. The shamans trained themselves not just to slow their pulse, but to quiet their desires. Wanting was too loud. Grief was too wet. The spirits preferred clean, cold minds, and they showed up for those who could become that. One spirit, spoken of in hushed tones by Yupik elders, was said to ride the wind between snowflakes. It would only approach if the shaman hadn't moved in hours, hadn't blinked, hadn't swallowed. If it arrived and found signs of life, it left. But if it found silence real, silence, it would nestle against the spine and whisper names. Names of the dead, names of unborn children, names of animals that hadn't yet crossed the ice. These weren't hallucinations, at least not to those who lived them. The knowledge brought back from such trances was often too specific to ignore. Descriptions of cracks in the sea ice days before a hunting party found them. Warnings about storms before the clouds turned. Or the name of a young woman's illness when no one else had spoken it aloud. It wasn't magic. it was proximity. Stillness, in these cultures, was a location, a place you entered with practice, and the cold was both the map and the price. If you shivered, you weren't ready. If you wept, you couldn't hear. But if your mind was still and your flesh was stone, then just maybe the cold gods would speak. Sometimes they came as animals, a raven perched too long on a roof, a white bear passing without glancing at the camp. Sometimes they came in dreams, thick with snow and the scent of whale oil. But most often, they came in nothing, in the absence, in the weight of silence pressing against the ribs like a second heartbeat. The irony, of course, is that the spirits most feared were also the most fragile. They scattered at sound, they retreated at heat. The same flame that kept children alive could drive the gods away. So shamans learned to sit in darkness, in cold, in silence so vast it cracked the edges of thought. And in that silence, something would begin. A tug behind the eyes, a pulse not quite their own, a knowing that didn't belong to the body, and they'd follow it, deeper, colder, because ecstasy, in the Arctic, didn't explode. It crept, and when it finally arrived, it felt less like fire and more like forgetting where your fingers ended. But still, that wasn't the end of the trance. That was just the invitation the spirits had whispered. Now came the descent, into the places where the dead walked sideways, and the soul might not come back in one piece. There are cultures where childhood is sacred, where small hands are kissed, and laughter is proof of innocence. And then there are places where childhood is treated more like a temporary illness, something to be endured, exercised, and eventually cured. In the eastern highlands of Papua New Guinea, among the Sambia people, boys weren't born clean. They were born contaminated, not by sign, but by softness, maternal contact, female influence, the syrupy touch of women who fed and cradled and held them too close. It wasn't symbolic, it was anatomical. They believed the mother's essence, the polluting substance, lingered in the boy's blood, in his breath, in his very bones. And if left unchecked, it would rot him from the inside. Masculinity, then, had to be manufactured. It didn't grow like a beard. It had to be burned in, dug out, purged, rebuilt. A boy wasn't naturally a vessel for ancestral spirits. He was a sponge soaked in the wrong fluids, and every drop had to be wrung out violently. Initiation began early. Around the age of 7, boys were taken from their mothers and delivered into the custody of male elders, men who had already undergone the rites and now stood as both custodians and sculptors of the masculine soul. The separation was abrupt, total, and without ceremony. One night you're at your mother's fire, eating pig fat with your fingers. The next, you're in the men's house, surrounded by sharp stares and the dry laughter of men who remember how badly it hurts. From that moment on, touch was not comfort, it was instruction. Boys were told that their bodies were impure, swollen with feminine residues, that their voices were weak, their thoughts too soft, their bodies ill-equipped to house the ancestral dead. Everything had to go. And so began the preparation for cleansing. Not washing, not confession, but a physical, sensory unmaking. The elders didn't need boys who questioned, or cried, or flinched. They needed silence, emptiness, a blank slate thick enough to bear the scars of instruction. The body was the enemy and the altar. The enemy because it had absorbed too much softness. The altar because it would soon be carved into something worthy. The first lesson wasn't strength. It was surrender of comfort, of self, of the idea that the body belonged to the boy at all, and that surrender would be tested, not with fire or fists, but with ritual precision. Blood would come, so would vomiting and shame, but not yet. First, the body had to be told it was unclean. Only then could the real work begin. Cleansing, in this context, wasn't metaphor. It was a physical procedure, ritualized, deliberate, and disturbingly effective. And it started with the nose. The Sambia believed that the maternal essence, her softness, her moisture, her scent clung to the child's insides like rot. It had to be flushed out, and the fastest route was upward. Boys were forced to insert sharp reeds into their nostrils and blow with such pressure that blood spurted onto the dirt floor. Sometimes it was guided. An elder would press the boy's chest, pinch his nose shut, and whisper reminders, "If it doesn't bleed, it isn't working." This wasn't done once. It was repeated regularly, over years. The aim wasn't just nasal cleansing, it was blood as baptism, blood as the undoing of maternal bonds, and the sight of it thick, coppery, ritualized served as a signal to the spirits. This body is being emptied, it is being prepared, and there were other fluids to evacuate. Vomiting was encouraged, often induced by swallowing large quantities of water or infusions made from bitter leaves. Sometimes chili was involved, rubbed on tongues, shoved up nostrils. The idea was simple. If barbaric, the more violently the body rejected its contents, the cleaner it became. These were not moments of dramatic release, like modern visions of exorcism. They were slow, grim, routine. Boys knelt in rows and bled, or puked, or shivered until their legs stopped obeying. One practice involved scraping the tongue with sharpened cane. Not just to draw blood though, that was part of it, but to erase softness from speech. The mother's voice, they said, lived in the tongue. Her words had soaked in, stuck to the flesh. Scraping removed it, or at least left the kind of pain that made speaking her name a little harder next time. The process was humiliating by design. Tears were discouraged, sobs were punished. To cry was to prove the cleansing hadn't worked. The body was still resisting, and a resisting body couldn't house spirits, it was already too full. Older initiates watched with the detached weariness of those who had already endured it. They didn't console, they observed, and in doing so, confirmed that the new generation would carry the memory correctly. The pain wasn't a glitch, it was the archive. Even after the blood dried, the effects lingered. Sore throats, blistered lips, sleepless nights, and strange dreams. Some boys reported seeing their mothers' faces in the smoke, or hearing their names echo when no one had spoken. But the elders insisted these were good signs, proof that the spirits were moving in, or rather, that the maternal presence was finally moving out. The worst part wasn't the pain, it was the waiting. After each round of purging, boys were left alone. No voices, no songs, just the thrum of blood in the ears and the creeping realization that the body wasn't theirs anymore. And in that emptiness, raw, aching, and unsure, came the next phase, when silence stopped being absence and became invitation, when the body, finally vacant, was considered ready to be filled. A body doesn't become sacred just by bleeding. It has to be noticed. And the spirits of the Sambia ancestors were notoriously choosy. They didn't want clutter. They didn't want affection, softness, or memory. They wanted vacancy, stillness, a body hollowed by pain and disciplined by silence. So after the purging, after the nosebleeds, the vomiting, the scraping came, the stillness, not rest. That would imply comfort. This was closer to suspension. The boys were secluded in the men's house, away from women, away from food that wasn't approved, away from words that hadn't been purified. They slept on the ground. They bathed in cold streams. They sat in silence, so dense it made the bones itch. And then they waited. The waiting was the point. Spirits aren't summoned with ceremony, they're lured by absence. The more completely the boys erased themselves, the more desirable they became as vessels. They weren't taught to pray. They weren't encouraged to imagine. Instead, they were taught to hold still, to keep their breaths shallow, to leave space inside. Some describe the sensation later as a kind of drift. Hunger turned into lightheadedness. Silence began to hum. The world dulled around the edges. And into that dullness, something stepped. Not all at once. Not like a ghost in a story. More like a weight in the chest that wasn't entirely yours. A thought that arrived without being formed. A name whispered into the spine. The elders called this the moment of entry, not possession. Not revelation, but reception. Ancestral spirits, they said, couldn't speak into a crowded house. The body had to be aired out, purged of mother, purged of childhood. Only then could a whisper from the dead be heard through the ribs. Some boys claimed to hear them, old men they'd never met, giving instructions in dreams. Others claimed nothing at all, but woke up speaking with a different cadence, or walking with their arms held stiff like elders did. One boy was said to have slept through a storm without shivering, and when he woke, he knew which pig had escaped to valleys over. That was enough to be believed. The spirits didn't bring warmth, they brought gravity. The boys grew quieter, more still. Eyes that had once darted around the fire now stared straight ahead, unblinking. It wasn't trance, exactly. It was vacancy made visible. And that vacancy earned, through pain and perfected through silence, was the highest offering a boy could make. Not to the tribe, not even to the gods, but to the unbroken chain of male ancestors who had carried the line through blood and salt and silence. But now that the vessel had been made, it had to be filled with more than spirits. It had to be filled with masculinity, not the kind that grows, the kind that's handed down like a knife, one sharp edge at a time. What pain stripped away, ritual would rebuild, but not gently. Masculinity, in this corner of the highlands, wasn't inherited or assumed. It was installed by gesture. And it wasn't enough to survive the cleansing, one had to perform the reconstruction. The boys were taught how to stand again, not upright, but correctly. Hands stiff, gaze level, legs slightly apart to suggest readiness. Every movement, even scratching one's leg, was scrutinized. Femininity, they believed, lurked in softness, rounded shoulders, tilted hips, the echo of a mother's lullaby in the way a boy held his breath. That had to be crushed out of them. Speech too had to change. The voice was retrained to drop in pitch, too slow, to shed any trace of gentleness. Boys who spoke quickly or sang in high tones were corrected, not once, repeatedly, until they learned that speaking softly was not a neutral act. It was a betrayal of form. And then there was the ritual ingestion. The Sambia held a belief that masculinity wasn't just a posture or a role, it was a substance. It had to be given, physically, from one man to another, specifically, from elder to initiate. And so, in secret rites, the boys were made to ingest semen, regarded not as sexual or exploitative in their cosmology, but as sacred fluid, a distilled essence of manhood, a physical transmission of ancestral power. It's here that anthropology folds into discomfort. The modern mind revolts, recoils, categorizes, but within the closed logic of the ritual, this act wasn't aberration, it was cosmology. It wasn't pleasure, it was duty. And pain, once again, wasn't a sign of failure. It was proof the body had room left to be shaped. The boys learned that their own fluid, saliva, sweat, even blood weren't yet pure, that masculinity had to be installed through someone else's suffering first. The semen of elders was treated like sacrament. To reject it was to reject the ancestors. To flinch was to invite weakness back into the bones. Afterward, the boys weren't praised. They weren't comforted. They were watched for signs that the spirits had settled, for stiffness in the jaw or silence at the right moment, for signs that the body, now remodeled, was becoming reliable. And so the boy became mannered by age, but by architecture, by how many layers of himself he'd been taught to shed, by how convincingly he could hold still and wait for the next boy to cry, because that was the final seal. Participation in the next round. And those who had been scraped, bled, emptied, filled, they never stopped. They became the ones holding the reed, the ones whispering reminders, the ones who knew, better than anyone, that sacred things are never born gentle. They are built in pain and remembered through repetition. By the time the boy became an elder, the pain wasn't pain anymore. It was protocol. Memory dulled it. Ritual burnished it. What had once scraped his throat or clotted in his nostrils had become over time just another instrument in the ceremony, another notch in the long bone of inheritance. And so, the cycle turned. The newly minted men became custodians of the same rites that had hollowed them out. Not with cruelty, that would be too simple. It was something colder than that, something sacred. The sacred always has a way of laundering violence, dressing it in meaning, polishing it with stories. The spirits, after all, demanded purity. And purity, in Sambia cosmology, came only through repetition. To interrupt the cycle would be to end the line. If no boys were emptied, how would the ancestors find a place to land? If the blood stopped flowing, how would manhood be transmitted? A single generation of softness could break everything. That's what they believed. That's what they feared. And fear is a powerful teacher. So the rituals continued. Each boy learning through bruises what couldn't be spoken aloud. Each elder recalling the ache of waiting to vomit, the sting of cane on tongue, the moment their childhood evaporated with a single nosebleed. And each repeating it not out of malice, but out of necessity. Because what is sacred, they were taught, is what hurts you and heals you. That's how memory became devotion. And devotion, over time, hardened into law. Anthropologist Gilbert Hurt, who worked closely with the Sambia for years, wrote of how boys who cried during the rituals were sometimes isolated longer, marked as unready, weak, but not forever, just until the next chance to prove themselves arrived. The door of manhood remained open, but only for those willing to crawl through it bleeding. It wasn't about testing pain tolerance, it was about loyalty. The ancestors weren't gods in the sky, they were watching through the eyes of the elders. They lived in every stern nod, every calloused hand guiding a reed toward a frightened nose. The boys weren't just made into men, they were carved into altars, carriers of a tradition so heavy it had to be anchored in flesh. And once you carried it, you never put it down. You became the one who whispered, the one who scraped, the one who told the trembling child, "This is how the spirits will find you." But spirits aren't known for gratitude. They don't comfort, they don't soothe, they haunt. And sometimes, when the ritual smoke thinned and the chanting stopped, a few would lie awake, staring into the rafters of the men's house, wondering if what lived inside them now was really ancestral, or if it was just the echo of every scream they'd been forced not to make.